My name is Nora Whitfield. I was 35 when my mother decided the cleanest way to impress my brother's future in-laws was to remove me from Christmas Eve dinner. She did not say it that way, of course. My family rarely used honest words when a polished one was available. My father called 3 nights before the dinner and said the guest list had become complicated. My brother's fiancée came from a family that owned boutique hotels across 3 states, and my mother wanted the evening to feel refined. There would be investors at the table. There would be people who were used to a certain standard. There would be questions about careers. And according to my father, explaining that I worked in fire and flood cleanup might create the wrong impression. He said it gently, almost kindly, as though he were protecting me from the embarrassment of being myself. What no one in my family knew was that the Kingsley Hotel Group, the very company owned by those future in-laws, had just chosen my firm for the largest emergency restoration contract in its history. They knew my name. They knew my safety record. They knew I had built Northline Recovery from one battered cargo van into a company with more than 100 employees, regional response crews, and 24-hour disaster teams. They simply did not know I was the daughter being erased from the holiday table. 6 weeks later, at a formal launch reception inside one of their restored hotels, my mother would put her hand on my shoulder and announce to a room full of executives that she had always believed in me. Then a woman in a silver dress would ask one calm question. And for the first time in my life, I would answer without protecting anyone. But to understand why that question mattered, you have to understand the smell of wet drywall. I was 20 when I first learned that disaster has a texture. My first job was with a small restoration crew outside Pittsburgh. I worked nights because night shifts paid an extra $1.75 an hour. We cleaned basements after storms, boarded windows after fires, pulled insulation from crawl spaces, and hauled ruined furniture out through doors that had survived when everything behind them had not. The men called me college because I took business classes at a community campus after 12-hour shifts. I kept my textbooks in a plastic storage bin so they would not absorb smoke. I studied estimating software in laundromats. I learned insurance codes while eating vending machine crackers in hospital parking lots because disasters do not schedule themselves around dinner. At 24, I bought a used cargo van from a plumbing company that had gone out of business. The side still showed the ghost of a blue wrench beneath the white paint. I purchased 2 industrial fans, 1 dehumidifier, 3 respirators, and a second-hand moisture meter that gave unreliable readings whenever the battery was low. I named the company Northline Recovery because I wanted people to hear direction in it. When a house had flooded or a business had burned, they did not need another person describing the damage. They needed someone to point toward the next dry room, the next safe wall, the next day. For the second year, it was me and Luis Ortega, a former carpenter with 2 daughters and the rare ability to stay calm when ceilings fell. By year 10, we operated from a converted manufacturing building near the river, with 31 service vehicles, a contents cleaning division, a commercial drying warehouse, and a command center that could deploy teams before most people had found the number for their insurance company. At Northline, people called me Ms. Whitfield only when they were angry or joking. Most called me Nora. During major storms, I slept on a cot beside the dispatch room. I knew which technicians were afraid of heights, which project managers needed coffee before conversation, and whose child had a school concert on Friday. I knew how to explain to a restaurant owner that the ceiling had to come down without making him feel that his whole future was falling with it. At my parents' house, none of that existed. There I cleaned up messes. That was my mother's phrase. My mother, Elaine Whitfield, had spent her entire adult life trying to outrun the fact that she grew up above her father's tire shop. She did not hate poverty so much as she hated evidence of it. She covered furniture in pale fabric, removed family photographs if anyone looked tired in them, and kept a guest bathroom that no guest was allowed to use because the towels were decorative. My father, Martin, had retired from a regional bank after 37 years. He trusted titles, corner offices, and leather shoes that never met weather. He had never been cruel in the obvious ways. He never shouted. He never insulted me directly. He simply treated my choices as temporary errors that would eventually correct themselves. Then there was my younger brother, Evan. Evan was 32, handsome in a calculated way, and employed as a strategy consultant, which meant he could describe a problem for 40 minutes without touching it. My mother repeated his job title as if it were a family achievement. Every promotion became a dinner. Every new client became a story. Every photograph of Evan in an airport lounge was treated as proof that he was going somewhere important. My work only became visible when someone needed it. When my mother's friend discovered mold behind a kitchen wall, I found her a hygienist before sunrise. They accepted my expertise the way people accept plumbing, gratefully, privately, and without inviting it into conversation afterward. For years, I told myself they did not understand. That explanation was comforting because misunderstanding can be repaired. The truth was harder. They understood enough. They simply did not admire the kind of success that arrived in steel-toed boots. The only person in my family who had understood was my grandfather, Samuel. He repaired boilers in schools and hospitals for 42 years. His hands were square and scarred, with a pale line across one thumb from an accident he refused to describe. When I was a child, he let me hand him tools while he fixed things in my parents' basement. He never said that work built character. He said work revealed it. Watch what someone does when the room is cold and nobody important is looking, he told me once. That is the person. When he died, he left me his brass pocket flashlight. It was heavy, scratched, and too dim by modern standards. I carried it in the glove compartment of my first van, then kept it in the top drawer of my desk when the company grew too large for me to answer every call personally. I called it proof that someone had seen me before I had anything worth seeing. The trouble began when Evan met Audrey Kingsley. Audrey was not the problem. That matters. Her father, Charles Kingsley, was chief executive of Kingsley Hotel Group. Her mother, Miriam, oversaw the family foundation and several historic restoration projects. Their company had started with one roadside inn owned by Charles's grandparents and had grown into 19 hotels, each designed to look local rather than corporate. My mother heard 19 hotels and transformed. She bought books about wine pairings. She replaced the dining room chandelier. She began pronouncing Audrey's last name with a softness she never used for our own. At the first family dinner, Audrey asked what I did. I said, commercial restoration. My mother interrupted before Audrey could ask another question. Nora helps after floods and things, she said, smiling. Very hands-on. The phrase was meant to reduce me without sounding rude. Audrey looked at me, not my mother. That sounds intense, she said. Do you own the company? For one clean second, the truth had an open door. Then Evan laughed. Nora practically lives there, he said. She's always had trouble delegating. I let them. That was my mistake, although not for the reason my family later claimed. I did not owe them a resume. I did not owe them proof. But every time I allowed someone else to narrate my life, I trained them to believe silence meant permission. By the time Evan and Audrey became engaged, my mother had created a full mythology around our family. Evan was the brilliant son. My father was the disciplined provider. She was the woman who had raised 2 independent children. And I was the eccentric daughter who did unpleasant work because she had never found something more suitable. At the engagement dinner, my mother introduced me to Charles Kingsley as our emergency girl. Charles shook my hand and said, "Every family needs one." There was warmth in his voice, not mockery. He glanced at the faint white scar across my knuckle and asked whether I had worked a site that day. I told him a sprinkler line had failed in a medical office. What time did the call come? 3:16 this morning. He smiled. Then, you know what buildings are like before they put their face on. I remember that sentence because it was the first sign that Charles Kingsley understood work differently than my family did. My mother called us away before I could answer. 2 weeks after the engagement, Northline received an invitation to bid on a confidential contract called Project Lantern. The client's name was hidden behind a consulting firm. We were told only that it was a privately held hospitality group planning a rapid expansion and renovation program. They needed a regional partner capable of emergency response, environmental remediation, contents recovery, and business continuity planning across multiple properties. The contract would not guarantee disasters. It would guarantee readiness. It was exactly the kind of work I had spent 15 years preparing to do. It was also the largest opportunity Northline had ever seen. The consulting firm gave us 22 days. I gave them 21 years of my life. For 3 weeks, Northline became a building that forgot how to sleep. I worked the way I always worked when something mattered, from the ground up. The final presentation took place in a conference center outside Harrisburg. The client's representatives sat behind a one-way panel. We could not see them. They could see everything. Some people would have found that unsettling. I liked it. Disaster work happens when no one has time to arrange their face. If someone wanted to watch how I behaved without applause, they were already speaking my language. Halfway through the presentation, the consultant asked what made Northline different from a national provider with 10 times our resources. I could have talked about software, response zones, or our 96% contents recovery rate. Instead, I told the truth. A national company will know your property number. I said. We will know which maintenance engineer keeps the master keys in his left pocket. We will know which hotel has a guest with limited mobility on the third floor. We will know which manager freezes under pressure and which housekeeper notices water before the ceiling stains. Buildings fail in specific ways. People save them in specific ways. Our job is to know both before the emergency. There was no sound from behind the glass. I continued. And when the call comes at 2 in the morning, you will not reach a rotating call center. You will reach someone whose name you already know. If the damage is serious enough, you will reach me. The consultant closed his folder. 2 days later, Priya walked into my office holding her phone as though it contained unstable chemicals. We got it, she said. I stared at her. All of it. All of it. The room outside my office erupted before I could stand. Someone had been watching through the glass. Louis opened a bottle of sparkling cider left over from a safety luncheon. Technicians came in from the drying floor in protective coveralls. Dispatchers hugged estimators. One of our newest employees cried because the contract meant we could make 12 temporary positions permanent. That was what success felt like at Northline. Not a title. Not a photograph. People learning that their jobs would still exist in February. The client's identity would remain confidential until final signatures, but the consultant shared one sentence from their notes. The founder understands that buildings are lived in, not merely owned. I printed the sentence and placed it beside my grandfather's flashlight. The Christmas Eve dinner was announced the following week. Audrey's parents would be driving in. So would her uncle and his wife, who sat on the Kingsley board. My mother planned 7 courses for 8 people, though she had never cooked 7 courses in her life. She hired a florist to create a winter arrangement long enough to prevent anyone from seeing across the table. She borrowed silver chargers from a friend and polished them with cotton gloves. I was assigned dessert. My grandfather's maple bread pudding. It was the one dish he had made every Christmas morning after my grandmother died. He used stale brioche, too much cinnamon, and a sauce so sweet it made children quiet. I had his recipe in my handwriting because he had dictated it to me the last winter he was alive. Don't improve it, he had warned. People ruin good things by trying to make them impressive. On Tuesday, Evan came to my office. He had never visited Northline before. He stood in the lobby beneath a monitor showing active projects and looked past the photographs without reading them. He wore a camel coat, expensive shoes, and the expression of someone entering a place that might leave dust on him. My receptionist, Kayla, called upstairs. Your brother is here, she said. Then, after a pause, I think. I met him in the small conference room. He declined coffee and began with the language people use when they have agreed on something without you. We're all trying to make Friday easy, he said. For whom? He smiled as though I had made a joke. For everyone. Audrey's family is traditional. Mom is nervous. You know how she gets. I knew exactly how my mother got. The remarkable thing was how often that knowledge became my responsibility. Evan leaned forward. If work comes up, maybe keep it broad. Broad. Say you manage recovery projects. I do manage recovery projects. Right, perfect. Just maybe do not get into the mold, sewage, fire, debris part. I looked through the glass wall behind him. 2 technicians were rolling a drying chamber toward the contents warehouse. A project manager stopped to help without being asked. What part should I get into? He exhaled. Nora, come on. You know what I mean. I want to hear you say it. His face tightened. Some people hear cleanup and think janitorial. And that would be unbearable for you. That is not what I said. No, it is what you came here to avoid saying. He glanced toward the hallway, embarrassed that people who worked for me might hear him diminish the work they did. Then he lowered his voice. Friday is important. I need Audrey's family to see that ours is stable. That sentence did more damage than an insult would have. Stable. As though my existence were a loose railing in the family home. I asked whether Audrey knew he was having this conversation. He looked away. That was the answer. I will not lie about my work, I said, but I have no interest in dominating your dinner. Our dinner. He heard the word before I did. He stood. Just help Mom out, okay? When he left, Kayla came into the conference room with 2 coffees. I made one for him, she said, looking toward the empty chair. But he had the energy of a man who sends food back. I laughed harder than the joke deserved. The call came the next evening. My father phoned at 7:42, a time I remember because I was standing in the grocery aisle holding 2 cartons of cream for the bread pudding. He began with weather. Then traffic. Then he cleared his throat. Your mother and I have talked about Christmas Eve. I put the cream back on the shelf. He said Audrey's uncle had recently invested in a sanitation technology company and might be sensitive about environmental topics during dinner. He said my mother feared a conversation about damaged buildings could become unpleasant around food. He said the table was already crowded. He said we could have a separate family brunch after Christmas. Finally, I asked, am I invited? Silence. A grocery employee wheeled a cart of canned soup past me. Somewhere above the frozen aisle, a child was crying for a toy. My father spoke in the tone he had used during his banking years, when declining a loan. We think this year may be smoother if you sit this one out. Because of my work. It is not about your work. Then what is it about? Another silence. Your mother wants the evening to feel appropriate. Appropriate. A word with white gloves on. I asked whether Evan had requested it. My father did not answer. I asked whether Audrey knew. He said, let us not create more problems. That was the sentence that changed me. Not because it was the worst thing he had ever said. It was ordinary. That was why it cut so cleanly. My absence was not the problem. My reaction to my absence would be. I left the store without the cream. In the parking lot, I sat behind the steering wheel and watched people carry groceries toward families who expected them. I did not cry immediately. Grief rarely arrives on command. First came logistics. I mentally reassigned Friday evening. I checked whether our storm crews were staffed. I remembered that Priya's parents were visiting, and Louis had promised his daughters he would be home. Then grief arrived. I bent over the steering wheel in a dark parking lot, and cried for the version of myself who had spent 15 years believing one more achievement might translate into belonging. The next morning, I made the bread pudding anyway. I used my grandfather's chipped yellow bowl. I followed the recipe exactly. I did not improve it. On Christmas Eve, I drove to my parents' house at noon with the covered dish warm in an insulated carrier. My mother opened the door wearing a burgundy dress and an apron over it. Her hair was pinned up. Behind her, the house smelled like rosemary and furniture polish. She did not step aside. For a second, we stood on opposite sides of the threshold like strangers completing an exchange. "I brought Grandpa's dessert," I said. Her face softened with relief. "Oh, good. Evan told Audrey about it." Of course he had. Family traditions become very valuable when someone else is watching. She reached for the carrier. I did not release it immediately. "Does Audrey know I am not coming?" My mother's eyes shifted toward the dining room. "We said you were handling an emergency." "There is no emergency. In your field, there is always something." "That is not an answer." She lowered her voice. "Nora, please, do not make today harder than it needs to be." Through the doorway, I could see the table. 8 place settings. My chair had always been near the kitchen because I was the one who refilled water and cleared plates. A cream card now rested there with Audrey's uncle's name written in my mother's best calligraphy. I let go of the carrier. My mother took it. Before she closed the door, she said, "We will make it up to you." I looked at the polished table behind her. "No," I said. "You will explain it to yourselves." Then I walked back to my car. That night, I ate Christmas dinner in Northline's dispatch room with 11 people who had volunteered for the holiday shift. We ordered roast chicken from a diner because the caterer canceled. Kayla brought macaroni and cheese. One technician named Ben supplied a pie that collapsed in the middle but tasted perfect. We set folding tables between the dispatch monitors and used paper snowflakes cut by Lewis's youngest daughter. At 6:15, a sprinkler pipe burst in an assisted living facility 30 miles north. Within 4 minutes, the holiday crew was moving. That is what my family never understood about disaster work. It is dirty, yes. It is also intimate. You enter people's lives at the exact moment control leaves. You protect medication, wedding photographs, payroll records, oxygen equipment, a child's blanket. You do not get to be disgusted by someone else's crisis. You get to be useful. I spent Christmas Eve in a mechanical room with water dripping through my hair, while Ben shut down a riser, and an administrator moved frightened residents to the dining hall. At 9:30, the building was stable. At 10, we returned to Northline, reheated the chicken, and ate my portion of the collapsed pie. At 10:17, my phone began vibrating across the table. First Evan, then my father, then my mother, then Evan again. I turned the phone face down. Priya, who had joined us after her family dinner, raised one eyebrow. "Do we have another loss?" "Yes," I said, "but not one we can invoice." I did not know yet what had happened at my parents' house. I learned from Audrey the following morning. Her parents had arrived at 5. The first hour had gone beautifully. My mother gave them a tour of the house. My father opened a bottle he had been saving. Evan told a story about a consulting project and made himself the hero twice. Then my bread pudding was served. Charles Kingsley took one bite and asked who made it. My mother said it was an old Whitfield recipe. Miriam asked whether my mother baked often. My mother said, "The women in our family all have their specialties." Audrey corrected her. "Nora made it." That was the first crack. Charles asked where I was. My father said I had been called to an emergency. That part, by accident, had become true. Then Audrey's uncle asked what kind of emergency work I did. My mother said I coordinated cleaning services. Audrey told me she set down her spoon. "She owns a restoration firm," she said. Evan tried to redirect the conversation. Charles asked the name of the company. No one in my family answered. Audrey did. Northline Recovery. According to her, both of her parents became still. Not shocked. Recognizing. Charles leaned forward and asked my father to repeat where I was. My father said there had been a building emergency. Charles smiled. That sounds like Nora. My mother heard familiarity in his voice and asked whether he knew me. He said, "Not personally yet, but we signed a regional agreement with Northline this week. Your daughter's firm will protect every property we operate." Audrey said my father put down his wine without drinking it. Evan stared at her as though she had betrayed him by possessing information. My mother laughed once and said there must be another Northline. Miriam asked whether there were many restoration companies in the area, founded by women named Nora Whitfield. No one answered. Charles, then, did something my family had not prepared for. He praised me. Not politely, specifically. He described our response model. He quoted a line from my presentation about knowing buildings before they put their face on. He said the board had voted unanimously. He said the national bidders had more resources, but Northline had more judgment. Then he asked the question that made the whole dinner impossible to repair. "If Nora is working tonight, why did you tell us last week that she would be in Vermont?" My mother had apparently invented a ski trip. Audrey had not known that detail. The room changed. My father said there had been confusion. Miriam asked whether I had been expected at dinner. My mother said the table was small. Charles looked at the 8 seats. Audrey asked Evan directly whether he had known I was excluded. He said it was Mom's decision. My father said we all agreed it would be simpler. And there it was. Not a misunderstanding. A vote. Audrey was quiet for several seconds on the phone after telling me that. Then she said, "Nora, my father asked your mother why the person trusted with 19 hotels could not be trusted at one dinner table." I closed my eyes. Some sentences arrive years late and still find the exact place they were meant to land. What did she say? She cried. Of course she did. My mother's tears were not always false. That was what made them effective. She genuinely felt injured whenever consequences entered a room without asking her permission. Audrey continued. My mother asked whether you knew we were coming. I knew. And whether you had agreed not to attend. No. Then she asked why your dessert was good enough for the table when you were not. I could not speak. Across the Northline yard, Lewis was helping a new technician secure equipment in a van. The morning was gray. Water from the assisted living job still darkened the floor near the wash station. Audrey apologized. Not for herself, for witnessing something she believed should never have happened. I told her she did not owe me an apology. She said, "Evan does." That was the first time I heard uncertainty in her voice when she said my brother's name. Before we ended the call, she told me one more thing. Her parents had been discussing Northline for weeks. Charles had replayed part of my presentation for the executive team. Miriam had asked their foundation director to study our community recovery program. They already respected me before they knew I belonged to the family trying to hide me. The irony should have felt satisfying. It did not. Vindication is not the same as comfort. Sometimes the people who finally see your worth are standing beside the hole where your family should have seen it first. My father called that afternoon. He did not apologize. He asked whether I could speak with Charles and make clear that there had been no insult intended. You want me to protect the relationship. We want to avoid damage. Damage to whom? Nora, this affects Evan's future. I told him I would not discuss family matters with a client unless the client raised them. I would not lie if asked. I would not manage the consequences of a decision I had not made. You are making yourself unavailable when your family needs you. No, I said. I am being available for the correct emergency. My mother sent a message an hour later. You should have told us about the contract. We were blindsided in our own home. I hope proving your point was worth hurting your brother. Evan's message was shorter. You could have warned me. I typed 3 different replies before deleting them all. The only answer that remained was the one they had avoided. You could have invited me. I did not send it. Silence had changed meaning. Before, silence had been permission. Now it was a boundary. The contract began on January 2nd. During the first property survey, Charles joined us in old work boots and never mentioned Christmas until the inspection was over. Beside the service elevator, he apologized for asking questions that had exposed a private wound. I told him ordinary questions were not the problem. The answers were. He nodded, and we returned to work. 3 weeks later, a frozen pipe ruptured above the ballroom of the Kingsleys, flagship hotel. By 3:10, I was inside the hotel with Lewis, Priya, 2 extraction crews, an electrician, and the chief engineer. Water had crossed half the ceiling and begun running down the walls behind decorative panels. A charity gala was scheduled in the ballroom that evening. We isolated the damaged line, opened controlled sections of the ceiling, placed desiccant units in service corridors, and moved the event to an adjoining gallery while hotel staff reset tables. Our contents team dried linens. Audrey redesigned the entrance route before sunrise. Charles carried chairs until someone threatened to report him to his own board. That recovery did more for Northline's reputation than any presentation could have. People saw our technicians moving behind temporary walls while music played on the other side. They saw work, not a slogan. The Kingsley Board expanded our agreement to include renovation oversight and resilience planning for 4 new properties. In early February, an ivory envelope arrived at Northline. The Kingsley Hotel Group was holding its annual Founders reception at the restored flagship property, where it would announce the expansion and recognize our emergency work. Miriam had written beneath the formal invitation. We would be honored to introduce the partner who kept our doors open. My family was also invited. Priya read the guest list over my shoulder and said, "You are going as the founder." I told her I had never gone anywhere as anything else. "You know that," she said. "They do not." 4 days before the reception, my mother came to Northline. It was the first time she had entered the building. She walked through the lobby slowly, taking in the wall of safety certifications, the framed newspaper coverage from major storms, the photographs of crews standing in ruined schools and reopened restaurants. "This is much larger than I expected," she said. I did not answer. She sat across from my desk and placed her purse carefully on the floor. She began with concern about the wedding. Audrey had postponed setting a date. Evan was devastated. The Kingsleys were judging all of us over one unfortunate evening. Then she arrived at the real reason for her visit. At the reception, we need to present a united front. A united front is not the same as a united family. "Nora, I know you were hurt." "You knew I would be hurt before you excluded me," I said. She looked toward the window. "I was under pressure." "Did Charles ask you to remove me?" "No." "Did Miriam?" "No." "Did Audrey?" "Of course not." "So the pressure came from your imagination." Her eyes filled. "You always make everything sound ugly." "No, I make it sound specific." She reached across the desk. "We were proud of you," she said. I moved my hand before she could touch it. "No, Mom. You were relieved when I was useful. That is different." Her expression hardened. Then she looked toward the Northline logo, mounted on the wall behind me. "Could we at least take a photograph here? Just us. I would like to show people where you work." She already had her phone in her hand. "No." Her mouth opened. "What do you mean, no?" "I am declining a photograph." "You are punishing me." "I am refusing to help you create evidence of a relationship you did not build." She stood. I told her exactly what would happen at the reception. I would be professional. I would not initiate a conversation about Christmas. I would not insult her, Evan, or my father. But if anyone asked me a direct question, I would answer honestly. You would embarrass your own family in public. I was embarrassing in private, too, remember. The reception took place on a Thursday evening inside the former train station that served as the Kingsleys' flagship hotel. I wore a dark green suit and kept my grandfather's brass flashlight on a thin chain inside my jacket. Audrey hugged me near the ballroom doors and said, "You came." I was invited. My family arrived 20 minutes later. My mother entered first in a silver-gray dress, with Evan beside her and my father a few steps behind. They saw me standing between Charles and the mayor. My mother paused. Then she crossed the room, wearing the same polished smile she had practiced for every Christmas photograph of my childhood. "There is our Nora," she said brightly. Evan shook my hand. My father told me I looked well. None of them mentioned that they had not spoken to me in 5 weeks. When Charles stepped onto the platform, the room quieted. He spoke about the company's history, the new properties, and the ballroom flood. Then he said, "Plans matter, but in a crisis, character is the only plan you cannot print." He introduced me. The applause began before I reached the microphone. I looked across the ballroom at technicians, hotel managers, investors, local officials, and the family who had believed my work needed to be edited out of dinner conversation. I did not speak about them. "A restored building is never the work of one heroic person," I said. "It is the result of people doing unglamorous tasks correctly while no one is watching. Northline exists because those people deserve to be trusted before a crisis, not merely thanked after one." I named Lewis. I named Priya. I named the night crew who had saved the ballroom. Then I thanked the Kingsleys for treating our work as a partnership, rather than a service they preferred not to see. When I stepped down, my mother was waiting beside a cluster of guests. A reporter from a regional business magazine asked how my family felt about Northline's growth. My mother answered before I could. "We always knew Nora would build something extraordinary," she said. "She was independent from the day she could walk." Her hand settled on my arm. I felt the performance begin. Then Miriam approached with 2 hotel owners and Audrey's uncle. She greeted my mother warmly and said it was wonderful to see the whole family together. My mother relaxed. Miriam turned to me. "Nora, I hope the emergency you handled on Christmas Eve ended well." My mother's fingers tightened around my sleeve. Miriam was offering me an exit. All I had to do was say yes. I could have named the assisted living facility. I could have described the sprinkler line. I could have allowed my mother's lie to become true because the universe had provided convenient evidence. For 15 years, I had done exactly that kind of work for my family. I had found the least damaging explanation. I had covered the opening. I had dried the wall. I had never removed the source. "The emergency ended well," I said, "but that is not why I missed dinner." Miriam's expression changed. My mother's hand left my arm. "Why did you miss it?" the reporter asked. There it was. A direct question. I answered it. I was asked not to attend. My family believed my work in restoration might seem unsuitable to people who owned luxury hotels. The words were quiet. The room around us became quieter. My mother laughed once. There was a misunderstanding. "No," I said. "There was a decision." Evan stepped forward. "This is not the place." I looked at him. "You are right. The place was our parents' house. I was not allowed into it." My mother's face collapsed. "It was one dinner," she said. "One. We were trying to protect your brother's future, and you have turned it into a public spectacle. You protected his future by erasing my present." "You knew about the Kingsley contract," Evan said. You let us walk into that dinner without warning. I was following the confidentiality agreement. You could have told us something. You asked me not to talk about work. Charles joined the circle. My mother looked at him immediately. Charles, this is a private family matter. Nora has always been sensitive about. He interrupted her. The person who protects our employees, guests, and buildings is not a liability to our family. Audrey came to stand beside me. She looked directly at Evan. Did you know before your father called her? Evan's jaw tightened. Yes. And you let me sit at that table while everyone said she was away. I was trying to keep the evening calm. No, she said. You were trying to keep yourself comfortable. My mother began to cry. Guests nearby pretended to examine the architecture while listening to every word. Miriam stepped closer. Her voice was quiet. I think you expected us to respect your family less if we knew what Nora did. My mother wiped her eyes. We did not know how people like you would see it. Miriam became very still. People like us. Charles answered. My grandfather cleaned rooms in the first inn because he could not afford staff. My mother washed sheets. I repaired boilers before I had an office. There is no honest work beneath this family. He looked at Evan. And there is no title impressive enough to compensate for contempt. Then Miriam looked at my mother. You were ashamed of the one person in your family we had already learned to trust. No one raised a voice. No one needed to. The truth did not require my choreography. It only required that I stop moving furniture in front of it. My mother turned toward me. Are you happy now? I studied her face. I saw fear, humiliation, anger, and something almost like grief. But not curiosity. Not one question about what those years had been like for me. I am not happy, I said. I am finished lying for you. My father had remained silent near the edge of the group. I looked at him. He lowered his eyes. Dad. Nora, please. What do you want me to do? He opened his mouth, but there was no script left. My mother walked out of the ballroom. My father followed. The reception slowly resumed around the space they left behind. An hour later, my father waited near the coat check with my coat over one arm. When I approached, he said, You made your point. No, I answered a question. We can fix this. I looked at him. All my life, my father had confused quiet with peace. What does fixing it mean? You come to dinner. Your mother apologizes. Everyone moves forward. That is covering the wall. He frowned. You do not understand. No, Dad. Work taught me what repair actually costs. I took my coat from his arm. Fixing is not pretending the damage never happened. You have to open the wall. You have to find the source. You have to remove what is contaminated. You have to let the structure dry. And sometimes you discover the thing you were trying to save was never structurally sound. His face changed. I felt no satisfaction. Only clarity. I said I would not return to a table where my presence depended on who else was invited. If you want a relationship with me, I told him, come to my world without needing anything repaired. Ask a question. Stay for the answer. The aftermath was quieter than the confrontation. Audrey postponed the wedding. She did not end the engagement immediately. She told Evan that one bad decision did not define him, but the reasons beneath it might. They began counseling. For months, she watched whether he could take responsibility without turning responsibility into performance. In March, Evan came to Northline alone. He sat in my office and admitted he had supported excluding me. He said he had been afraid Audrey's family would compare us and find him less impressive. He had spent years accepting a family story in which my work was small because that story made his own life look larger. I thanked him for telling the truth. "Is that enough?" he asked. "For today." Before leaving, he asked whether he could see the operations floor. I gave him the tour. He listened. My mother did not call. She told relatives that I had humiliated her at a business event. She said the Christmas dinner had been a seeding misunderstanding. She said success had changed me. Success had changed me, but not in the way she meant. It had not made me arrogant. It had made me tired of pretending confidence was cruelty whenever it inconvenienced someone who benefited from my silence. The first week without her calls felt like punishment. Then it became space. My father came in April. He arrived without an appointment and stood in the lobby reading every photograph. I watched from the stairs as he stopped in front of an image of our crew, restoring an elementary school after a fire. When I reached him, he pointed at the date. "How long did that take?" I answered. He asked another question. Then another. He stayed for 2 hours. He met Priya. He watched Ben demonstrate moisture mapping. He listened as Daria explained how the contents team cleaned smoke from books 1 page at a time. At the end of the tour, we stopped beside my original van, which Northline kept in the warehouse as a reminder of where we began. The ghost of the blue plumbing wrench was still visible beneath the paint. My father touched the side panel. "I should have come sooner," he said. It was not enough. But it was true. "I should not have made that call," he added. We stood beside the van in silence. I showed him the compartment where I had once kept my grandfather's flashlight. "He believed in you," my father said. He paid attention. My father absorbed the distinction. I would like to learn how. I did not forgive him in that moment. Forgiveness is not a ribbon cut across a doorway. But I let him return the following week. Then the week after that. The Kingsley agreement exceeded every target. We hired 18 permanent employees and opened a second response center. The company received regional recognition, although the award that mattered most to me was a handwritten letter from the assisted living administrator saying every resident had returned safely to their room. Audrey and Evan eventually married in a small ceremony the following autumn. I attended. My father sat beside me. My mother did not. By then, she and I had entered no contact. People hear that phrase and imagine freedom arriving like a door slamming. It did not feel like freedom at first. It felt like standing outside after a fire, watching smoke leave a building you once called home. No contact is not the absence of love. Sometimes it is love with nowhere safe to go. I loved the mother I had wanted her to be. I missed the possibility of her more than the reality. But I stopped trading peace for access to a person who required me to disappear whenever my truth complicated her image. The following Christmas Eve, Northline set tables inside the contents warehouse. Every employee working the holiday rotation could bring family. We invited former clients who had nowhere else to go. The assisted living administrator came with 2 residents who remembered the sprinkler flood. Audrey brought dessert. My father brought coffee and arrived early enough to help stack chairs. Before dinner, I placed my grandfather's maple bread pudding in the center of the table. It was slightly uneven. The sauce had spilled down one side. I did not improve it. When everyone sat down, Daria's son asked what the brass flashlight on my necklace was. I told him about Samuel. Then someone asked Louis how he joined the company. Someone asked Priya what the hardest storm had been. My father asked Ben about the collapsed pie from the year before. Every story received another question. That was when I understood what a table was supposed to do. It was not supposed to prove who belonged. It was supposed to make room for people to become known. For years, I had believed my family did not see my success because I had failed to explain it properly. That was not true. My success had never fit the language they used to measure people. It smelled like smoke. It wore protective boots. It arrived at 2 in the morning. It could not be framed neatly in a photograph because it was always moving toward someone else's emergency. They erased me because seeing me clearly would have forced them to question the entire story they told about value. They had written theirs in job titles, guest lists, polished silver, and the approval of strangers. I had written mine in wet drywall, restored rooms, permanent jobs, reopened doors, and the names of people who answered when the phone rang after midnight. Here is what I know now. Anyone who asks you to become smaller so they can appear more impressive is not protecting the family. They are protecting a picture. And pictures cannot love you. They cannot ask a follow-up question. They cannot notice when your chair is empty. They cannot repair anything. Real repair begins the moment someone stops saying it was only one dinner, only one joke, only one misunderstanding, and finally asks what the damage cost. Sometimes a family can be rebuilt. Sometimes one person learns to walk through the door. Sometimes a brother admits that your silence made him comfortable. Sometimes a father arrives late, but willing to listen. And sometimes the person who created the damage remains outside because accountability feels more threatening to them than losing you. Healing is not making all of those outcomes match. Healing is building a life that does not collapse around whichever one you receive. A life so honest, so useful, and so full of people who ask follow-up questions that the locked door behind you stops feeling like the entrance to home. After everyone left that Christmas, I walked through the quiet warehouse turning off lights. The long table was covered with crumbs, coffee cups, and bent name cards. It did not look refined. It did not look expensive. It looked lived in. My father was waiting near the original van. He held out my grandfather's flashlight, which I had left on the table. "You forgot this," he said. I took it. Then he hugged me. Awkwardly, as though learning a new piece of equipment. But he did not let go too quickly. When he left, I stood alone beneath the warehouse lights. Outside, one of our emergency vehicles pulled into the yard, ready for the night shift. Somewhere, a pipe would burst. A kitchen would burn. A family would stand in a damaged room, believing they had lost everything. And my people would go. Not because the work looked impressive, because it mattered. That was the standard I had spent half my life searching for. Not whether someone could present me proudly at a dinner. Not whether my profession could be made appropriate. Whether I could enter a damaged place and leave it safer than I found it. That night, I locked the warehouse door with my grandfather's flashlight warm in my hand. And I finally understood that no dining room, no family story, and no carefully arranged guest list had ever possessed the authority to decide whether my life was worthy. So if someone has pushed your chair away because your life does not match the picture they want to display, remember this. You do not have to spend another year proving that you deserve to sit where your dignity is negotiable. Build your own table. Write every name clearly. Ask the questions no one asked you. And never confuse being tolerated with being known. Share this story with someone who has been made to feel like the inconvenient part of their own family. Tell me in the comments what boundary finally gave you your life back. Subscribe to After Silence Stories, and I'll see you in the next episode.